Hello, thank you for joining today to take part in this interactive diversity and inclusion in the workplace presentation and dialogue presented by the Chester County Chamber of Business and Industries Women Influencing Business Committee. My name is Erica Doan. I'm with Bentley Systems as well as a Women Influencing Business Committee member. Bentley is proud to sponsor and host today's event. For those unfamiliar, Bentley is a software development company that supports the needs of those responsible for creating and managing the world's infrastructure. Although headquartered right here in beautiful Chester County, Bentley is a globally diverse organization, which employs more than 4,000 colleagues of different cultures, backgrounds, and perspectives throughout 42 countries worldwide. Many of those colleagues are joining me here today. Our teams leverage the talented people from all over the world, and I feel privileged to work for an organization that strives to promote diversity of thought. Before getting started here today, I want to remind you that portions of this event, and actually I have started the recording already, will be recorded. Please feel free to leave your camera on or off or mute, unmute at your own discretion. And now, without further ado, please let me introduce the Women Influencing Business Chair, Jolie Karp.
Thank you, Erica.
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Jolie Karp, and I'm the chairperson for the Women Influencing Business Committee and a partner at Stefanos Slack, a regional CPA firm located in Wayne and Wilmington. The members of the WIB committee give their time and effort in supporting the mission to educate and inspire women to enhance their business skills, develop their professional network, and be effective and influential business leaders in the community. The WIB committee spearheads various events like this one throughout the year. Please check the Chamber's website frequently for our upcoming events. I would now like to introduce Gigi Rios, who began her career in diversity, inclusion, and racial justice in 2004 in the greater Harrisburg area. Her work began with the Youth Build group, where she worked with youth adults between the ages of 16 and 24. They worked on leadership skills, racial justice, academic strengths, and vocational trade to graduate the program and take their next steps in their personal and professional career. During her time in Harrisburg, Gigi was a committee member of the Dauphin County Diversity Forum and a board member of the Denzetti Community Arts Center. In 2015, Gigi returned to her hometown of Westchester and brought her experience and knowledge of youth development, community outreach, diversity, inclusion, and racial justice to the Oscar Lasco YMCA and Child Care, where she is currently the Senior Director of Membership and Programs. Gigi currently is a YUSA Dimension of Diversity trainer, as well as strengthening inclusion, welcoming newcomers and immigrants into our community, and also is a committee member of the Single Mothers of Chester County Conference. Gigi attended her diversity and inclusion Gigi attained her diversity and inclusion certification from Penn State World Campus, and her goal is to have the difficult conversation and help the community see things to various diversity lenses. Please welcome Gigi.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, everyone, for taking the time to come together and have this conversation. I am going to share with you a PowerPoint slide, so we'll have some information that I will go through, as well as some interactive activities and questions. I do want to say during the activities and questions, I would love for participants to share their responses if they feel comfortable. If you don't, I still ask that you write your responses down, and that way you have that for you. It's just a great way as we move through the information. So I am going to do the sharing of the screen and make sure that it works okay. Can everyone see the screen?
Yes, looks good.
So as we go through diversity in the workplace, one of the things I always do is making sure that we define diversity and inclusion. So we'll start with that as well. We'll learn who we are before you can understand the various layers of diversity in individuals. You have to feel comfortable in self-identifying yourself and where you stand. And then we'll share a little bit about ourselves through the activities if you're open to that, and I'm open to sharing as well. And then we'll talk about what we feel an inclusive community looks like. I do have some community changes data to share. I do want to share that the resources that I have for today, it's been brought to us throughout my training from cultural lenses that I've done, dimensions of diversity through YUSA. I've also done some training with Cultural Bridges to Justice. So I've pulled a little bit through my workshops, my trainings, and my experiences to bring this together for you. So my ultimate goal for everyone is to become aware and welcoming to all, to have a better understanding of language, and to foster healthy and positive relationship with staff and the community. Just a few workshop guidelines that I wanted to go over. We definitely want to make sure that we're creating a safe space for everyone. So I did put these guidelines on here. It's to create a safe and open climate for challenging all forms of oppression, as well as learning to cherish and nurture cultural diversity, and each person's commitment to respect her, himself, themselves, and each other, participants, is crucial. And then these guidelines are offered as a framework for our time together. So I just ask that everyone is willing to be respectful of everyone's perspective, experience, ideas that they share. Our own perspective, ideas, and experiences are important to us, and they are valid. I ask that everyone be honest and respectful of each other. Any of the stories and experiences that we share here, we want to make sure that we are not moving forward and sharing anyone else's story or experience without their permission outside of this group. As I mentioned before, this is being recorded, so if you don't feel comfortable sharing because of that, I respect that, but I will have my contact information at the end if you ever want to have further dialogue after this. Any questions so far? I know it's kind of more just the agenda and the guidelines, but I always ask if there's anything so far before we get started. And if you have any questions at any point in time, you can jump on the chat, or you can kind of just say, excuse me, and ask a question. I love to hear myself talk, but not completely. I also like to have some interaction with participants, okay? So let's start with what is diversity and inclusion. So diversity is the presence of differences that make each person unique, and that can be used to differentiate groups and people from one another. And we all have many layers of diversity. Many times when you mention the word diversity, everyone jumps to race, ethnicity. But we also have to think about, with diversity, there comes sexual orientation, gender identity, economic background, cultural background, your age. All of that plays into your uniqueness and who makes you. And then inclusion is the full engagement and development of all the stakeholders. So you have your participants, your members, your staff, policy volunteers, program volunteers, partners, local community, and vendors. And you can walk into an organization that is very diverse and not be inclusive. You can walk into an organization that is inclusive and not very diverse. So to kind of make this work, you have to think of diversity and inclusion as a partnership. So one of the things we always say is diversity is getting asked to the party, while inclusion is getting asked to dance at the party. So as we think about diversity and inclusion, we have our first activity. I love activities. I want you to think about the different layers that make up who you are. So thinking beyond your race and ethnicity, think of your age, your gender, think of parental status, relationship status, economic background, and think about who you feel you are and how you identify yourself and what helps you define who you are. And the reason that we do this activity is that so we can learn, as we have many layers, when we enter a conversation, an interaction, or an event, we're bringing our layers of diversity, and the individual or the group that we're interacting with is bringing their layer. So you can take a piece of paper, you can think about it off the top of your head. I put 5 lines, but if you feel more comfortable doing 4, you can do 4 or 5 lines. The only thing you have to do is each statement starts with I am. So for example, I'll share mine. I am woman. I am a mother. I am Puerto Rican. I am Westchester born and raised. I am Arroco Gandules and Penning, and I am social justice advocate. To me, those are some of the layers that define who I am. So I just want to give everyone a few minutes, and then I'm going to ask if any participants are willing to share. I have to remember to add music to this as we wait and do these activities. I feel like you need like Jeopardy music in the background. And then if you feel you're ready and you have about a few lines that you want to share, you're more than welcome to just share with us. You can keep your camera off, or you're more than welcome to turn your camera on as you share. Do you have anyone who's willing to be the first to share? Or does anyone have any questions about the activity?
Isn't it the hardest thing to wait, Gigi?
I know. That's why I said I feel like I need like Jeopardy music or something in the background.
Sorry, Gigi. Is Anne-Marie Walters here?
Hi, how are you?
I'm good. I forgot to unmute myself.
It's okay. It's okay.
So anyway, I'll start again.
Okay.
So I'm Anne-Marie Walters. I work for Bentley Systems, like Erica. Anyway, here are my 5. So, and interestingly, after you said I am woman, I was like, oh, that's interesting, because my first thing I put down was I am an engineer. I didn't put a female engineer. I said I'm an engineer. I'm a mother of 2. I'm British. I'm Christian, and I am generous with my time. I love to volunteer. There you go.
Thank you for sharing. Is there anyone else?
I only got 3, Gigi.
That's okay.
I'm a privileged white grandmother. I'm an executive, and I'm an ally.
Thank you. Very strong statements. Thank you.
I can go, Gigi.
Okay.
I'm a woman. I'm Mexican and Latin American. I'm an employee in Bentley for 20 years. I'm a mother of 3.
Thank you for sharing.
I can go.
Okay.
I am a husband and father and son. I am the son of a single mother. I am a Jew. I am anxious to make my employer more progressive. And I'm worried about the hate in our country.
Thank you for sharing.
And I'm Noah. Good morning.
Good morning. Anyone else? Okay. Did anyone feel it was difficult as you were doing this activity to come up with I am statements? Is my first question. And my next question is, did you feel that there were some I am statements you were hesitant to share? And why is that?
I think it is difficult, Gigi, and I think it's challenging for those who aren't comfortable putting themselves out there. I could say I am so many different things. And a lot of those people know I am a single mother, I am this, I am that. But then also at the same time, exposing another layer of myself, it can be a challenge. And I think that some people are hesitant for that reason.
Absolutely. We tend to want to share the IMs that we know that, depending on the group that we're with, already know about us.
Mm-hmm.
And in our mind, that's sharing. We've shared some statements. We feel okay. But as you start to dig deep on who you are, and as I said, there's many different layers. I shared I am woman. I shared I am mother. I didn't share that I am a mother of 2 children. I am someone who has lost a child. That starts to open that up. I shared I am Puerto Rican. I'm very proud of that. But I didn't share, in Westchester, I am someone who has been racially profiled, both in the Hispanic Latino group as well as in groups of non-color. So I received it on both ends. One way because of the color of my skin, and the other way because of my name. So it is very hard to open yourself up as you're continuing to learn the different layers that you have. But it's a start if you're able to just start with the top layer, because if you can understand, if I can understand when I'm having a conversation with you, Robin, if you don't mind me using you as right now, you're the one I see on camera right now, so you're my person. If I'm having a conversation with you and we really want to have that deep, difficult conversation, okay, I have to be able to understand the different layers that affect my perspective when we're having this conversation, so that I can understand that you're going to be coming with different perspective into that conversation as well. I think that's the hardest part for everyone, which makes both of us vulnerable in that conversation. So we need to be able to create that safe space to start asking those questions. And that's one of the things we'll talk about as we go into the workshop a little bit more. When I meet Robin for the very first time, and when Robin meets me for the very first time, we are going to make assumptions of each other. It is human nature for us to look at someone and to have certain assumptions and biases in our mind. It's something that's created in everyone's mind as we were going through life, because it's also a protective mechanism, because we want to make sure that we surround ourselves with individuals that are similar to us to make us feel comfortable and feel safe. And sometimes when we found individuals that are a little bit different to us, sometimes there are times where we feel that's a danger zone. And so it's hard to take ourselves out of that. But recognizing that if you have a bias, are you going to be intentional now the next time I have that conversation with Robin? So the first time it's unconscious, when I first meet Robin, I may make an assumption and I have to take a step back and recognize that I didn't give her the opportunity to start the conversation. But then the second time, if I'm saying I truly want to be open to diversity and inclusion, I need to be intentional of recognizing my bias when I enter that conversation with Robin. And the first start of that is being vulnerable yourself, being open to the unknown. So I hope everyone had the opportunity to write some statements, even if you didn't share. And I hope maybe next time you're open to having this activity with some other individuals as you're getting to know them. And if you notice, as one person starts, it starts to get a little bit more comfortable, because everyone feels like I never want to be that one person. So kudos to the engineer who started it off for us. Thank you, because that kind of starts to make the room feel a little bit more comfortable. But the other piece of it is, some people will hold back because you want to see what everyone's I am statement. You want to see how deep someone else went. So you may start at the surface, but then if someone puts something where they shared their gender identity or their sexual identity, then you feel like, okay, I can go a little bit deeper. So you kind of want to read the room. And that's okay. That is, like I said, again, it's a defense mechanism for every one of us. We don't want to be vulnerable in a space that we are unaware of. But at some point in time, we have to take that first step to be able to start that conversation. Someone had always said to me, sometimes you do have to stand alone. But as you stand alone and start the conversation and make noise, you'll start to build the crowd. So you won't always stand alone. Any questions so far? Or is there anything else anyone wanted to share in regards to this activity? Okay. Did anyone feel it was easier to share some pieces of your dimensions of diversity versus others, or some layers of who you are?
Gigi, I can say, sorry, I don't want to, this is Erica again. I can say, yeah, I was able to jot down a few and then I just kind of stopped and I needed a little more time there. So I find that to be interesting and has me thinking a little bit. So thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, I would agree, Erica. I kind of got those first few down, then I was like, now what do I say? It's like, whoa, it definitely was harder.
So Gigi, here's the engineer back again, Anne-Marie.
There you go, Anne-Marie. Sorry, I will learn your name.
It's all right. It's all right. No, I found it easy to put my hand up first, and also putting engineer down first, because for my whole career, which has been quite long now, I've been an engineer and one of very few in a world of men. So I'm in there. I'm an engineer first, but I did find, like the others, after I got to I'm British, my number 3, the other 2 were much more personal and do I put it down or do I write this down type of thing. But I just thought I'd share, being an engineer in a world of men, you tend to get in there, I think.
Absolutely. Claim that statement and use that statement always. That's amazing. It is very difficult. It's easy to make a statement when there's something that you're proud of that you've accomplished. It's easy to make a statement when it's the very top layer of who you are. It's harder when you have to start thinking a little bit deeper sometimes. And there's also that sense of how will the group react if I share that? So.
Hi, I'm Kristen Riley. Mm-hmm. And, when I started writing this, I kind of felt like, oh my gosh, I'm so boring, And I also, I didn't want to define myself by, I'm a mother, I have 2 children, my profession, because I'm like, well, that's not who I really am. And then I just kind of paused and I was like, well, then what am I if I'm not that, right? Right. So, yeah, and I didn't want to necessarily share because I'm like, well, that's not interesting, especially in a group where we're talking about diversity and inclusion.
Right. Everyone is interesting. Everyone has many layers of diversity. It may look a little bit different on you than it does on me or on others. But as you start to think about, and I'll share the different layers, it's something that we do at the YUSA and we call it Dimensions of Diversity. And it just talks about the layers that defined you that you may not necessarily always be able to change. So the age that I am, that's one of my dimensions of diversity. My age will not change. I can hope to be 21 again. I really don't. But the age I am today is my age. And then you have another layer, and those you could slightly change a little bit more. My relationship status, I can possibly change it if I wanted to be in a relationship. I can choose to remain single. Now there are some circumstances that may change that, that's out of my control. And then you have the bigger picture of your layer, which is more of your professional development, your organization, the department that you work for, the title that you have at your organization. And each of those play a piece into each other in identifying who you are and how you feel you can self-identify. The other piece of that is that depending on the situation or the interaction you're having, one of those layers may stand out more than others. So if I'm walking into a family event, of course, my layer that stands out to me the most is my race and ethnicity, my cultural background. I'm surrounded with my family and friends. If I walk into a meeting where there's a lot of older individuals or younger individuals, my age may stand out more at that point in time. That may be just something that's hot on my mind at that moment. If I'm walking into an organization where there is majority one gender versus the other, then my gender identity may stand out. So also each of your layers may reflect stronger than the other one, depending on the interaction that you're having or the event that you're at the moment. But that's also something to think about when you're entering a conversation with someone as well in the community or staff person. When you're having that conversation with that individual, their layer of dimension of diversity that's standing out may be completely different than the one that you have at that moment. And so that's something that you have to think about when you're starting that communication. It's like I said, it's always easier to start at the top layer, you know, gender identity or parental status. Some people are comfortable sharing age. All of that tends to be okay. It's when you start to dive a little bit deeper, and then depending on the situation that you're in is where you have to start really thinking about who you are and feeling strong and comfortable in who you are, because there's going to be times where that's tested, and you have to be okay to stand your ground and be okay with who you are. But I'm sure you're not boring in any way. I'm just sure that you just have to take the time to dive deep, so that you'll come up with something that you would never thought of before. So I'm going to move forward in our next piece if no one else has anything else to say. One of the things I wanted to think about, so when we talked about dimensions of diversity, I brought up in having a conversation, we always make assumptions at some point when we first see someone. Someone walks through the door for the very first time, we're going to start looking at what they're wearing, how their hair is, maybe they say something, the way they say something, and we start to build just a little bit of an assumption, a prejudgment, a bias on that person. And I know a lot of individuals will hear the word bias and we get very negative or afraid to accept that, to say that we have that. But I want everyone to understand that we all do have biases. Having the biases and understanding it and doing what you can to change it is what will set you apart from someone else. Okay, so I'm going to show a couple of pictures. I'm going to ask a couple of questions. No one has to answer. I just want individuals to start thinking about, as you're looking at these pictures, are some of these things coming to mind to you even before you get to know these individuals? So what is different about these faces? And what do you see in common with these faces? Can you tell their educational background? Can you tell what faith or belief they belong to? What is their sexual orientation? Can you tell who is employed, who was born outside the US, and who was born inside the US? So as we look through these pictures, and without meeting any of these individuals, when we first see them, even before we enter a conversation, we may start to make judgments on these individuals. We may start to have some assumptions of who they are, where they come from, how they will present themselves, what they've been through, what they're going to do. And that is called assumptions, it's stereotypes, and it's bias. So now we need to get to the point of how do we change our way of thinking? So stereotype is a generalization imposed on an entire group. So many of us have been in a conversation or we've heard on the media or read somewhere where they stereotype a group of individuals based off of one individual or one incident, right? I mean, if we look at the state of the world today, there are many times where stereotypes has played a part into where we stand today and the events that have occurred. Then you have your prejudice, a prejudgment, an attitude, a feeling, or an opinion. Now, I did say at the beginning of the workshop, everyone's opinions are valid. And I just want everyone to understand someone goes through an experience and it forms an opinion, and that's why it makes their opinion valid. But some people are open to changing their opinion based on the experience they had before. And then you have your bias. Prejudice in favor of or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, and usually in a way unconsidered unfair. So when we talk about diversity in the workplace, and the reason that I share this with you is if you have the same individuals at the table making the decisions, and those individuals have the same viewpoint on the organization, on the next steps, on who they would like on the team, they are going to continue working and hiring and interacting with the same groups of individuals. So what you need to do is, who's at the table? Making sure that you're bringing in the different experiences, the different ideas, the different opinions. But not only opening a seat at the table for those individuals, are you taking the time to listen to what they're saying? So we serve a community that's always and forever changing. Are we making sure that the work we're doing in our organization represents the community that we're serving? Because the minute that we're not, how are we making sure our organization is staying relevant in the community and serving our members as we say we are? So one of the things I wanted to share is all humans are biased. It's a natural state of brain that evolved from the days when we needed to be able to calculate very quickly if something was like us and thus friendly or unlike us and possibly dangerous. So now that we understand this, what do we do moving forward to change our way of thinking? How do we take the time to recognize our bias? And what conversations are we having to be intentional on changing our bias and giving that interaction, that conversation, a difference? So the next activity, it's a little bit more deeper than the I am, and I won't ask anyone to share just because this one takes it to a different layer, and I understand that being open in a space where you may not feel comfortable, I would never want to put anyone outside of that. But I do want you to take the time to think of a statement, and I do want you to take the time to just review that for yourself. Okay, so this is, let me see, there we go. I am, but I am not. So we talked about the different dimensions of diversity, correct, in our layers. And one of the things is cultural identity. So I wanted everyone to think of their cultural identity, their race and ethnicity, their economic background. And think of an I am for that statement, but I am not. So then you select a stereotype, a prejudice, or a bias that's been placed on the identity that you selected. That is not true. If you feel safe to share, you're more than welcome to. If you want to write your statement and just keep that to yourself and understanding that you need to make sure where I say you feel comfortable being who you are and stand for that that statement is not true. And what are you doing to making sure that people understand that? So I will use an example, and I am not saying this in any way to offend anyone in the group, but this is the stereotype that I've experienced in my life. So this is my statement. I am Hispanic Latina, but I am not a drug dealer. And the reason that I share that statement is when I was younger, my dad and I were driving one time, and it was a brand new car that my dad had just gotten here in Westchester. And we were pulled over. And the first assumption that was made by the police officer was that my dad obtained that car by illegal means. They asked my dad what he did for a living. They asked my dad who he worked for as a drug dealer. They made the assumption that because we were Hispanic and he was driving a nice car, that the only way he would be able to afford a vehicle like that was by doing something illegal to obtain it. And that has always stuck with me. So one of the statements I always share when we do this activity is, I am Hispanic Latina, but I am not a drug dealer. And that was a stereotype, and it's changed throughout the years. But in growing up in Westchester, that was very much a very strong stereotype for our cultural, our race and ethnicity group. So I just wanted to give everyone a few minutes to think of their statement. As I stated before, this goes a little bit deeper in your layers of diversity. So if you wish to hold on to this for yourself, you may. If you feel safe enough to share with the group, I open it up to you. And I'll just give everyone about 5 minutes. and then we'll move forward as we look at our changing communities.
Gigi, this is Terry. I'll share.
Sure, thank you.
I've done this activity with you before, so I have a little more time to think about it. So I would share that I am gay. I'm part of the LGBTQIA+ community, but I do not know how to fix anything. So there's this assumption sometimes that lesbians know how to fix and build things, and I have absolutely no skill sets whatsoever to do any of those things. So that's one that I sometimes share. It's not as poignant as yours, but it does sometimes, it's an assumption that people make, and it's based on stereotypes, and it's not something that it's hard because people make assumptions based on the group that you're in, that you can do something, or that you are good at something or not good at something because of your participation, or being identified as being part of a group. And
right.
Sometimes that's even an assumption, but yeah, so that's one that always is interesting to me, that people assume that is absolutely not true.
Thank you for sharing. Yes, we've done this a couple times. But it's very hard. It takes a lot to feel comfortable in self-identifying who you are. And the groups that you are a part of, the family that you feel welcome into. And then when there is negative stereotype tied to that group, it just feels like another battle that you have to fight. Another way that you have to stand up for who you are, and just making sure that you stand strong. Once again, I'll say it, you stand alone sometimes until you make enough noise, and then you'll build your group. But breaking down the stereotypes, it's one way to get started on that conversation. And some of the reasons that there are stereotypes is ignorance. And when someone hears ignorance, it's another word that everyone attaches negativity to, but we have to understand that ignorance just means we don't know what we don't know. And so being open to learning about what you don't know. We hear stereotypes so many times that some people start to believe the stereotypes, and then the conversation starts with the next person and you bring up the stereotype, and so on and so on. But it's now time to have the conversations on breaking those stereotypes and saying, no, this individual in that group may feel this way, but the thousands and thousands of other individuals in that group may not feel that way. So we can't tie one person with one whole group and say the whole group, because they all fit into that identification, all do the same. Thank you for sharing. Is there anyone else that is open to sharing? If not, like I said, I completely understand. The very first time I shared my statement, it was very much a shocker for a lot of individuals in the group. Some just because they've heard the stereotype before and they felt very sad that I had experienced it. Some individuals were shocked that I was able to feel comfortable enough to share that statement in that form of a stereotype, because it's a strong one. So it's okay if you're not ready to, but just something to think about.
Hi there, it's Julie Seymour.
Hi.
Hi. Yeah, I've got quite a strong one that's been a bit of a struggle for me. I think it's quite a strong one. So, especially since I've moved to Europe. So I guess my statement would be, I'm a white South African, but I'm not a racist. And it's a big one I've had to deal with, especially coming to Europe. There's an assumption due to the history in South Africa, or, there's an assumption that because of apartheid, if you're a white South African, you're privileged and you're just brought up to be a racist. And it goes against everything I fundamentally believe in.
Right.
And it's not necessarily even related to the home I grew up in. My family was very against any form of prejudice or stereotyping. So the first time I ever encountered it is when I moved to Ireland 12 years ago. I had a lot of comments made to me along these lines, or people made assumptions, and it's been a struggle, but it's a struggle I'm worth speaking about, because sure, there is a lot of struggles, in my home country, but I don't like to be painted with that brush because it's not who I am.
Right. I applaud you for sharing. And I think that it's great that you say you feel that you're open to having those conversations. It's very hard to start that conversation and that dialogue when you're trying to have a teachable moment, is what I call it, and educate on stereotype that hits home for you and it hits hard. So I applaud you for having those difficult conversations and making sure that you're continuing to educate on the stereotype and breaking down the barriers of the stereotype.
Thanks.
I could share one.
Thank you.
And it's actually just came up in conversation last week. And I don't want to drag this out because I could defend many reasons as to why. But I am the face of pregnancy loss. I am the face of miscarriage. I am the face of late-term loss. And no, I am not going to try to have another child. And I think that some people like to, find out why, or when are you going to try again? When are you going to have another one?
Right.
No. And I think that a lot of those folks, they look for the rainbow baby and they have that, and, and all of that, but it's no. And I think that is a stereotype, is that when you lose 1, 2, or 3, you should try again. And that's not me.
Thank you for sharing. And sorry. And if this is not what you want to hear, but sorry for your loss of someone.
I'm okay with it. No more for me.
No, and that's okay. Everyone needs to feel comfortable in where they are and the decisions that they make. I think that there is a huge stereotype all over the world in regards to marriage and having kids and what family life is supposed to look like for many. So that one is especially, I would say, older generations. So generations, as we go further back, there's very much a traditional way of thinking on the home life. And if there's anyone on here in older generations that may call me out and say, no, that's not true for everyone, I agree. It's not everyone. But there is that traditional home life that many see. And so when someone decides not to go down that path, it's very much a big conversation, and I don't understand, and I would like to learn more. And as hard as it is, I'm sure, for you to continue to have that conversation, I think that it's good that you're willing to have the conversations so that they can understand. Once again, just because one doesn't mean it's perfect or available for everyone, or everyone wants to be in the same group of circles of doing that. So you guys have shared some great ones. I want to thank everyone who shared and opened themselves up to that. This statement's a little bit harder than the I am statements. So I appreciate that. For those that were able to write it down and just take it into yourself and understand that and be open to having the conversations to change that stereotype, to make sure that people understand that that stereotype does not apply to everyone. That's going to be the biggest thing. If there's one takeaway I ask of everyone from this workshop, is just be open to having those difficult conversations. I understand that it puts you in a vulnerable space, but asking those questions, having those conversations, providing that teachable moment is the only way that we'll move forward. And if we're hoping to continue changing our communities for the better, we have to start somewhere. So if that's the one takeaway everyone takes away from this, that's one thing I will say. There has been plenty of times that I've started a conversation and I felt like You could hear a pin drop in the room, but it ended great towards the end. And it doesn't mean that every part of that conversation was good. There were times where we completely disagreed. There was times where we needed to take a breather and take a step back. But the fact that we were willing to continue the conversation is what helped move it forward. So that's just something I want everyone to take away from this. And many may be asking, I'm not talking so much about the workplace, and the title is diversity in the workplace, but I feel to get to that point in your organization, you have to understand who you are, where you come from, understand how your community is changing, and then be ready to start entering that conversation in your organization and what you're going to do moving forward to making sure that there is diversity in the workplace. And when I talk about diversity, once again, I'm not just talking about race and ethnicity. There is gender and sexual orientation, and there's age, and there's economic background. All of that, you want to make sure that you're able to offer as much as you can in your workplace, because that's truly when you can do the work in the community that you serve. Okay. If there's no one else that's open to sharing, I'm going to move forward. And as we move forward, we're now going to jump into more of outside of who we are and understanding our layers and understanding what bias and stereotype is and how we can have the conversation to make the changes. I wanted to share some data about community changing. And I did receive this data from YUSA. I just want to share that as a resource. This wasn't anything that I created myself. But it's just something to think about as we're moving forward. Excuse me. Because as we're doing this work, we have to make sure that we understand our communities and how it's ever evolving and changing. So I just wanted to share a few data reviews that we came up with as we were working through our numbers, and was provided for me. And then I just want to ask some questions about, is there anything that stands out to you as you're reading this? 13% of the US population is foreign born. 1 in 4 kids under the age of 6 is a child of immigrants. Between 2010 and 2050, the Asian population in the US will grow by 134%. More than 60 million speak a language other than English at home. By 2050, Latinos will be almost 30% of the US population. Hispanic Latinos accounted for 56%, of population growth from 2000 to 2010. Together, Latinos and Asians wield more than $2 trillion in consumer purchasing power. The number of people identifying as multiracial increased by 32% from 2000 to 2010. 14% of US households face food insecurity. By 2050, 22% of the US population will be 65 plus. 39% of immigrants identify as non-Christian. Among US adults, the religiously unaffiliated are increasing. 9 million US adults identify as lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. 30% of LGBT youth have attempted suicide. 45.3 million people live in poverty in the US. 20% are under the age of 18. The population by race and ethnicity, if you look at where we are today to where we're projected to be in 2060, one thing that you will notice is Hispanic, Latino, African American, Asian, and multiracial are increasing. 70% of women in the labor force have young children. African American communities represent $1 trillion in economic buying power. And 3.6 million Americans trace their roots to an Arab country. So I wanted to share that data with everyone, and I want everyone just to take a minute to look through everything that we just read. And is there anything that stands out to you as you look at this?
It's a lot. It's a lot of, it's really good information, and it's a lot. It's more than I thought.
Mm-hmm.
That's probably just my own ignorance, but absolutely.
Was there anything that anyone was surprised about?
I have to say, not to be, I've been thinking about learning a second language. I'm thinking Spanish is a good one.
Spanish is absolutely a good one. I'm not biased in saying that in any way. I definitely do think when I was reviewing these data and I was learning a little bit more, one of the things that, and it's not in this data in any way, but one of the things that we learned about was that in other countries, it is mandatory for kids as young as in kindergarten to take a second language. And then once they hit a certain age, they have to add a third language. US is one of the only countries that taking a second language is usually not introduced to kids until middle school. And it's not mandatory. It's an elective. So that's just something that to me was a little bit, it was sad and it was crazy at the same time. It was sad that we're not showing our kids or giving our kids the opportunity to learn a different language. I think that's something beautiful, but also we're doing a disservice for our children as they grow up and they grow, professionally and personally. That opportunity is lost to them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's opportunity where I was growing up, really first in high school. Granted, quite a few years ago. So, I mean, I'm not sure that things have changed, though, to be honest. It was a rural area that I grew up. So it would have been great, though, to be able to have that second language. I think that you're right. Oh, I totally agree with you. You're right. Being able to have that second language immediately would be like right away in school as you're growing up, because there are a lot of families who just speak the one language. But to be able to take on and have that second language, I think would be amazing. But doing it much earlier is far better than trying to do it later.
Yeah. And the communities that we serve, I mean, if we're looking at this data and the changing of our community and how one population is growing more than others, having that additional language, having that additional understanding would go a long way when you're serving the community.
Yep.
Was there anything else to anyone else in the data? Sorry about that. Yes, it does. Learning the language, I mean, I always try and push it as much as I can to anyone. I don't always push Spanish, but I will just say that's a great one. But just learning another language that you know that you've always wanted to learn, you feel comfortable with, maybe you just want to expand your knowledge. I think it's a great opportunity. In my household, so my dad's primary language is Spanish, and my mom's was born in New York City, so English was her primary language in the household, but my grandparents still spoke to her in Spanish. And I'm absolutely grateful for that. To this day, if we go to my grandparents' house, they will only speak to us in Spanish. And then in my mom's house, my parents go back and forth. So we've been able to do that with our kids. And it's just nice to see that, for them to have the opportunity to know two different languages. And it also gives them the opportunity to hold on to their race, their ethnicity, their tradition, their cultural background. I think that's something that we tend to shy away from, especially when we move to, there's a lot of families that I've spoken to that when they move to the US, they almost, what they call become Americanized. And so many times they stop teaching another language or speaking another language in their household because they want to make things easier and more comfortable for their children. And then as they see their children get older, a few of the families, and this is just a few families that I've spoken to as I'm learning more about different cultures and ethnicity, they're sad that some of their traditions have been lost, and there's some things that their kids will not take on. But at the time that they made those decisions, they thought they were doing what was best for their kids. But now that we look at this data, we definitely want to make sure that if we want to keep our organizations relevant in the community and we want to continue serving everyone that we're serving and expanding, the communities that we serve. Chester County is huge if we look at that map, and I'm sure there may be individuals on here that serve beyond Chester County area. You want to make sure that your staff and the partnerships that you build in the community, you have this understanding of where the community is changing. And so what are we doing to be more intentional in making sure that we are represented in the organization, the communities that we serve? If someone walks through the doors at your organization or walks into a meeting with your committee or your group, do they feel that they can identify, feel comfortable with, have a conversation with someone in your organization, in your group at the time? Or do we feel that we have room for growth in our organizations, our meetings? So that's a question I pose to everyone. And reading this data here, do you feel that you have more work to do in your organizations or your groups or your meetings to make sure that you're equally representing as much as you can everyone in the community? Do you feel that you have everyone at the table that you should have at the table when having those conversations? And I'm okay to share. I work for the YMCA, and I think that the YMCA is taking the initiatives and doing the work to make the changes in our organizations. But I do feel that there's some room for growth for us. But one step that we've made towards that growth is recognizing that there's room for growth and making sure that we're doing what we need to do to make the changes to be relevant in the community and serving our community and being supportive of all of our employees and helping all of our employees in their growth. So it's okay to say that you're not there yet, but are you doing what needs to be done to make sure that you're getting there is what you need to think about.
And Gigi, I would just add, and I work with you, so we work for the same organization. I think, you know, one of the things that some of us who are at the decision-making table need to keep in mind is that there's so many competing priorities, and especially through this COVID pandemic, we're all, you know, fighting to survive this thing, and literally and figuratively. And so I think the reminder, like trainings like this one, to keep this at the forefront and to not let it take even a second seat, to remind ourselves that this is a priority. If we want to serve our communities well, we have to be having these courageous conversations. And I mean, I appreciate having you as part of the Y, but I also appreciate that you're able to share your perspectives with outside groups too, because I think it's so helpful to kind of take a breath and think about these things for even an hour and try to figure out how to implement those into our everyday lives. So thank you for doing that.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing that. Did anyone else have anything that stood out to them, anything they were surprised, anything they were not surprised about? And if you don't, that's okay. Okay. So the last piece that I'd like to go over is, so we've talked a little bit about ourselves and our layers, feeling comfortable on who we are. We talked a little bit about recognizing that we have biases and that there are stereotypes. And so we need to start having that conversation and breaking down those stereotypes and standing and our grounds and feeling comfortable in who we are, and having those courageous or difficult conversations, taking those teachable moments. Then we learned a little bit about our community and how our community is changing. So we see this data and we see how things, as we've moved forward, there's going to be a change in everything from race and ethnicity to sexual orientation, to gender identity, to gender in the workforce and all of that. The last piece to me is inclusive community. So now you've learned about diversity. You understand that diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance at the party. So now you have all of this data, you have this information. What does it look like to you to have an inclusive community? And there's no right or wrong answer. Everyone is representing a different community, a different organization, a different piece of where they are and who they are. What do we currently have that we can build on for our community? So what's something right now that we have in Chester County that we think is doing great and we just need to make it stronger? What do we need? So what do we currently not have that we could probably have in Chester County if you start moving the needle forward? So I'll share in Dauphin County, when I lived in Greater Harrisburg, we started what we called, it was called the Dauphin County Diversity Forum. So I know everyone's talking, you know, another committee, another task force. I understand we all have a lot on our plates, but it was something that just started a little bit of a change in the community. There was representation from different organizations all over Dauphin County, and we met once a month, and we were intentional that the conversation we had every month had something to do with diversity, inclusion, or social justice that affected Dauphin County and how we were going to make a change. And in the conversation or the presentation, we learned something, we talked about something, but we all left with an action item to move forward with as we went to the next month. So just something in thinking about Chester County needs. Do we have a designated group that's working towards changes in the community as a whole? We're doing little pockets of changes in each organization and each group, but how do we bring all of that together to make a huge impact? And then what is one thing you can do after today to start working toward this inclusive community? So learning a little bit about yourself, learning the difference of diversity, inclusion, and how we want to have a partnership with both of them. Talking about stereotype and bias and what we can do to break that down. Reading the data that you've read in regards to the changes in our community. What can you do starting today to move the needle a little bit closer to changing our community and serving our community as we should? So this is my last questions for everyone. I would hope that someone is willing to share. What does an inclusive community look like to you? What do we currently have that we can build on for our community? What do we need? And what is one thing you can do after today to start? And everyone can take a few minutes to think about it, but I would hope that at least 4 or 5 individuals or even more can answer these questions and are open to sharing to the group. I think this would be a great time to start the conversation with the group. You guys have a very strong community with the Chester County Commerce of Business and Chester County Chamber of Business and Industry. I wanted to make sure I said that right. So you guys have a lot of influence. You have a lot of networking in your group. So let's start this conversation on what we think it's going to look like as we move forward, and then utilize what we come up with today on taking one step. If each person in this workshop takes one step today, imagine the change that could happen in Chester County. So I'll give everyone a few minutes, and I hope, just give me 4 or 5 that would be willing to share.
Gigi, it's
Yes.
Janet, and you know, I really wish that people could come to work the way they are. And that's a really big statement, because, you know, just like this group is probably a little less willing to share, you know, it's because, you know, we're all vulnerable and feeling anxious and, you know, what will people think? And I had the same reaction. I'm boring, you know, who wants to hear about me? But if we could just create an environment where people actually could come in and feel comfortable in their own skin, right? And so how do you make that happen? And it's hiring a diverse population of people who are, you know, I don't want to say like-minded because that's the antithesis of diversity, but at least like-minded in, hey, you know, you can come in and feel comfortable about who you are. My organization has a long way to go in order to see, I think, a true seat at the table. And it's something that is concerning to me. And the other thing I was thinking about is the Women Influencing Business Committee. You know, when I first joined, I said, well, you know, I don't necessarily identify as a woman influencing business person. I consider myself to be an executive, kind of like our favorite engineer on the call. You know, it's like I don't necessarily want to call out the fact that I'm a woman, but on the other hand, you know, at the time when I joined, I said, boy, there are a lot of women who are struggling in business because they're fighting, trying to climb up a big wall. So I think that if we can have these conversations with our team members and start to break down the walls of talking about it, it is very uncomfortable. People they just want to bury their head. You know, it's Black History Month, and my company is celebrating Valentine's Day instead of Black History Month. You know, that kind of thing.
Right.
The totems that we use are extremely telling. So anyway, there's my share.
No, thank you for sharing. I would definitely say it is very difficult to start the conversations. I love the statement as coming to work, you know, as who you are and feeling comfortable in your own skin, but you have to start the conversation somewhere. Maybe it's inviting small groups of individuals to the table and just starting asking questions. One of the things we did one time, and this was before my work here at the YMCA, we brought everyone to the table and all we did was go around the room and we gave everyone the floor. And the only question we asked, and we didn't tie it back to race or ethnicity or diversity or inclusion. All we said was, how are you doing? And are you still okay with coming to work every day? But the one thing I will say to everyone is, if you're starting that conversation with your team, you have to be open to being vulnerable yourself.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the things I did in every activity in this workshop is I was okay and open to sharing what I had written down first before I asked anyone in the group to share, because that just shows I'm willing to be open if you're willing to be open with me. Sometimes an individual just needs to hear that. And I definitely think that you need to have a strong support and buy-in from senior leadership level all the way down, because you can do all the work with your frontline staff and your department can be amazing and you guys are working great and you're having these conversations and things are looking great. But if they feel a disconnect from senior leadership or higher, the work that you do is only going to go so far.
Right. So I think a takeaway is to ask. We do stay interviews as opposed to exit interviews. You know, what is going to make you stay? And maybe what I could do is, and I try to only do 3 to 5 questions because otherwise, you know, people don't want to participate.
Right.
But maybe ask a question on, you know, do you feel like you can bring your whole self to work? Whatever that means, and maybe that can start a conversation.
Absolutely, that would be perfect. Just one question in there. You know, do you feel you're being your true self, or do you feel you can be 100% you when you're walking through the doors here at work?
Yeah. And I think being asked to dance is a really good way to put it. You know.
Thank you. I give credit to the YUSA Dig team. I had nothing to do. I was a part of the conversation and they put together the statement. But that's definitely a start. Black History Month, that was a small, that was something I heard when you were having your conversation and you said about celebrating Valentine's Day, but nothing on Black History Month. But are you at a level that you can push for that? So
yes,
okay, because what I mean by that is I always make sure, and there's a group of us at the Y here that always make sure that we are having the conversation with the kids about Black History Month, or we're doing an activity with the kids, or we're offering a reading or a conversation for our members or our community, or we're posting something on our social media website to recognize and celebrate Black History Month. If you have the power to, or you're at a level of that decision making, that's a conversation I think that you should have. You know, just put something out there. Maybe there's others that would love to celebrate Black History Month and have that conversation or talk about it, and they just need that one individual to start it. And some staff, if they're frontline staff or they're not at a leadership level, may not feel comfortable being the ones to kind of, what they used to say, rock the boat, because they don't know if there'll be some form of a backlash. But if there's someone at a leadership level can open that door up for them, they feel supported, and then they may be willing to open up as well too. So maybe it's just doing, I don't know how your offices are, if you're mainly virtual, because I know some organizations are a little bit work from home, but maybe it's just sending an email out, telling a few lines. I'm sorry if you hear kids screaming in the background. The kids are running into the gym right now. So no one's hurt. It's just the kids excited to run into the gym. Just wanted to share that. But maybe it's sending an email out and just giving a little history of Black History Month and why it's important, and then highlighting some first or strong individuals that were advocates for Black History Month, who made a difference. Maybe even tie it back to your organization. So one of the things we've done here at the Y is the gentleman that started Black History Month, Carter G. Woodson, who started, it was actually a week and then it became a month. He actually had the conversation about having Black History Month at a YMCA. So we kind of tie it back to the organization, so it gives a little history. So maybe there's a first in your organization for someone that you can tie to Black History Month. But I would say just start with an email, or start with a flyer, or start with a bulletin for people to see that you recognize the importance of Black History Month. March is Women History Month. I mean, just those little things may just start something in your workplace for them. Is there anyone, and thank you, by the way, for sharing. I appreciate that. Is there anyone else, as they're looking through the last questions that we have here, that they would be open to sharing, or something they've realized after the conversations we've had today that they want to start doing or do a little bit better as we move forward? And I know we're probably running very close to time. I didn't know if there was any questions in the chat, or any questions that.
I've been watching. Yep, they're really good conversation in the chat.
It was kind of hard for me to see a little bit of both when I was doing the slide, so.
Thank you.
Sure. One of the statements I put here at the bottom of this slide, and I say it over and over, entering into a mutual relationship in which both parties open themselves up to each other. So I go back to when we started the conversation and the sharing, always be open to share a little bit about you and your statements or your feelings or your thoughts if you're going to ask someone in the group to share. Because if you're willing to be open and vulnerable, then they'll be willing to be open and vulnerable.
Perfect.
I have I'm struggling with these questions, to be honest with you. To me, what an inclusive community looks like, to me, it's multicolor. It's not monochromatic. Monochromatic is how I grew up. And now that I live in as much of a multicolor environment as I can, I love where I am. This feels like home. Growing up in small town, rural, did not feel like that was home when I look back.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you found home. That I will start with that. And an inclusive community will look different to everyone. So that's why I said there's no right or wrong. But I mean, what you said is great for what your inclusive community looks like for you. Now, with where you're living and how you feel comfortable in your home, do you feel that there's anything more that can be done? Do you feel what you do is the community is great and everything that they do? That's your next step in thinking of your community. So
yeah, I think reaching out to some of the neighbors who are newer, who might not feel quite as welcome. I think that's an important thing. Part of what I have done in the past is bake stuff and then take it over to the neighbors. Nice. In COVID times, I'm not sure how it was received though. So
you may not necessarily be able to bake stuff. You may have to buy pre-packaged, individually packaged bake stuff.
Exactly.
No, that's a start, and that's definitely something that's great to make everyone feel welcome in your community.
Yeah, kind of not as much as what we need in our community. I think we definitely need more support for people who don't have homes, and I'm not sure how to help there, but I would like to, but I'm not sure what I can do, quite honestly.
Yeah. I'm sure we can connect with some organizations in the community. I will and see what we can do. There's always something that can be done, even if it's just starting the conversation.
Yeah, because the environment I'm in, if you're outside, you're going to be freezing, and not because you guys have snow right now, but just because I'm quite a bit further away from Pennsylvania than what some are. I'm in Canada right now, so it's cold.
Wow.
Pretty chilly up here.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I will challenge myself. I will have them share your information if you're okay with that, and I will share my information at the end of the slide, and I will challenge myself to try and find you one resource to start a conversation with, and then you will keep me posted on how it goes from there. Because
okay, that sounds good.
Homelessness is huge in a lot of communities, and I think the pandemic just
made it worse.
Made it worse for a lot of families. So I will challenge myself to find you that one resource.
Awesome, thank you.
And this is recorded, so I can't go back on it.
Thank you very much.
Sure, thank you for sharing.
Does anybody else have a final question or thought before we wrap this up?
Hi, Debbie Bookman here. I just wanted to say thank you for this conversation. It's a really important conversation, and I love that there are a lot of organizations that are actually trying to step in and have these difficult conversations. I put it in the chat that the leadership, the commissioners started a diversity task force, such as what you mentioned. And we started out similar to what you said, not really narrowing in on diversity or just how are you doing as an employee, as a leader. And the young lady that just spoke about the one that's in Canada, I just want, we always think, at least I do, that I have to do something on a big grand scale, right? To help somebody, get with an organization. But what I've learned is that you start with baby steps. So an example is, I'm prothonotary and I have monthly check-ins with my staff. I'll just pick a staff member and just check in with them. And I checked in with one of my staff members because, now they feel really comfortable. We're more like a family, not just an office. And they feel really comfortable coming to me and talking to me because self-care is really important. And while we're working to help the constituents that come into the office, I always have to remember that we're all constituents. We all need help. And one of my staff members was telling me that he has an aunt that just moved to Pottsville. That's where I live. And she has autoimmune disease. And she has 2 children, 23 and 17, one that's about to graduate from high school. And I have a 17-year-old that's about to graduate from high school. And she goes to Coastal Area School District. And I was just thinking about the emails that I've gotten from my daughter, like for cap and gowns, and everything is virtual and you have to do everything online. And I said to him, did she get her cap and gown? Did she get her pictures done? And he said, I don't know. And I said, you know what? Get her information to me. And I went online and I took care of her cap and gown. I took care of her yearbook, and we're still determining whether or not she wants pictures. But she was scared to text me or to contact me. And I said, you don't have to call me, just text me, right? She was embarrassed, she was scared, right. But I know that that was far reaching because her mom is unable to work right now. So that helped out. So those are the things that, when we have everybody like a domino effect doing those small things, eventually it becomes a culture and it becomes a mindset. So because, and you know, diversity it's not you can't put a law out that says you have to be kind to everyone. It's something that's in us. It's our DNA. And like a child, if you keep doing it, it becomes a routine. So baby steps. That's the best advice I can say.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, thanks, Deb. I appreciate that.
Thanks.
And that's at the bottom of this. That's what what is one thing you can do after today to start? As you had shared, if every person on here takes one small step after today, it makes a huge impact. So thank you for sharing that. And I like the check-ins with your employees.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Gigi. Thank you very much for this wonderful and informative and eye-opening presentation. And I hope everybody does leave with action items that they're going to follow up with, and maybe a different perception on how you approach different situations. And thank you to Bentley for sponsoring this. If anybody has any questions or concerns, Gigi does have her contact information listed. And as she has stated earlier, she is with the YMCA down in the borough in Westchester at the Oscar Lasco Center. And I thank everybody for attending, and I hope you all found this enjoyable, and we'll see you soon.
Can I leave with one statement before everyone jumps off?
Absolutely. I'm not going to cut you off.
So first of all, I want to say thank you for the invitation to facilitate this workshop. Thank you to everyone who came on and participated, and I hope you have at least one small takeaway, nugget, action item that you want to move forward with. I'm forever open to learning, to changing, to growing. So if there's any continuous conversation anyone wants to have, my contact information is there. But the last statement I will leave, this was one that stood out to me, and I put it at the bottom of this slide. It says, more voices at the table help us see different perspectives. Respecting and listening to the voices at the table helps us live our purpose. So I hope leaving that with everyone, it gets you your thinking and your conversations going. And thank you again to everyone who joined us today.
Gigi, thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Great. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thanks very much.
Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gigi. Thank you, everyone.
You're welcome. Thank you, everyone.